I want to talk to you this morning about the TDC Group. That's the Doctors Company and our strategic business units. We'll talk a little bit about what the distinctions are. But most importantly, we'll talk about the vision and values, the mission of the Doctors Company, what are our core principles. We'll talk about some milestones from the past year. And then hopefully the more fun part of the morning, we can talk really about some just observations about what's happening in healthcare delivery in the United States. You're all living it in real time, but we reflect it in real time. And we do have we have one advantage, which is that we sort of have a nationwide perspective as we look at some of the changes. So this is what the TDC Group looks like. The Doctors Company is a reciprocal, which means it's owned by its members and only its members, no stock in the company. The Doctors Company is also the name of the company. It's also the name of the part of the company that provides your professional liability insurance for almost all of you. Some of you actually get MPL from TDCSU. TDC Specialty is a combination of two strategic business units, TDCSU, which is an excess and surplus lines company, which has really expanded our reach into other areas of healthcare, which is part of our broader vision for the future. Other areas of healthcare beyond professional liability. HRA, Hospital Risk, Healthcare Risk Advisors, is a company that we created after buying a hospital insurance company in 2019. It insures really the largest healthcare systems in New York City and really has expanded our ability to insure even mega healthcare systems and hospital systems. I put new acquisitions there. TDC has grown by merger and acquisition throughout at least the past 20 years of our history. And it's been an important vehicle for growth for the Doctors Company. M&A is not easy. As most of you know, actually living in a world of consolidated medicine, M&A is not necessarily easy, and more often than not, it actually is unsuccessful in the sense that the goals for which the merger was planned actually are not achieved, and sometimes they break up unhappily. TDC has had a much, much better history with that. In fact, if we look back at the merger and acquisitions of TDC, essentially 100% of them have been successful. And some of the obvious success of that process is that many of the people in our senior leadership, our president, our chief operating officer, our chief of business development, are from companies that were originally merged or acquired by TDC, and now they're at the very top of the TDC management. This gives you an idea of the range of healthcare that TDC is currently interacting with, and we expect over the next few years that it'll become even broader. And you can see that from our point of view, and hopefully from your point of view, it shouldn't matter much where you enter the Doctors Company, the Doctors Company Group. Several of the strategic business units can provide services. You shouldn't have to worry about which is which. Wherever you enter the Doctors Company, we will work behind the scenes to make sure that you get the very best possible services that we can provide. Healthcare is consolidating. We'll talk certainly a lot about that. Most of you represent very large accounts, very large healthcare institutions. And I think for a professional liability company to survive in the emerging landscape, it has to scale to meet the new scale of healthcare. Traditionally, more than 2/3 of professional liability insurance in the United States was provided by physician-owned companies like the Doctors Company. That number is under 60% now and going down, and will actually go down dramatically. TDC will be here, it'll be physician-owned, mission-owned by its members. But most of the other companies won't survive really the next decade because they're too small to continue to compete in this world of healthcare consolidation. But we're very proud of these relationships. I mean, they're actually pretty remarkable. And I was actually unaware of this, but I'm humbled by it and actually proud of it. TDC has healthcare relationships with 38 of the top 48 healthcare systems by revenue size, 16 of the top 20 of Yahoo Finance's health reputational scores, 15 of the 20 hospitals in the U.S. News, top 20 U.S. News World Report. So that's mostly you folks. And so again, thank you for trusting us. Thank you for partnering with us. All right, so what are the vision of the Doctors Company? Build a preeminent organization for service to healthcare. It's pretty straightforward, not easy to accomplish, right? But pretty straightforward and a pretty bright line for TDC. It also means we need to be enduring, right? There's always going to be healthcare in the United States, in the world actually, and it's always going to be critical to the quality of life, and indeed to life itself. And so we need to be we need to be growing, we need to be consolidating, and we need to be of scale and size for the future to be of service to healthcare. The mission of the Doctors Company is to advance, protect, and reward the practice of good medicine. And each of our SBUs has related missions that are similar to that, but defined as part of their contributions to healthcare. We would like every healthcare institution and every healthcare professional in the United States to be aware of the Doctors Company and to consider the Doctors Company for their healthcare risk transfer needs. We don't intend to insure every doctor or institution in the United States, but we certainly would like to have a profile that makes the profession aware of the company as we are aware of the profession. The really fundamental principle of the Doctors Company is best imaginable service. And best imaginable service, it seems obvious enough what it is, but it is actually a term of art. It has a pretty specific meaning. Best imaginable service means service so good that you, as a patient, as a client, as a consumer, whatever the context is, service so good that you couldn't imagine shopping anywhere else because you couldn't imagine any better service than what you're already receiving. So best imaginable service is a lofty goal. It's an aspirational goal. And it's a goal, by the way, which you never really achieve. And then when you think you have achieved it, you can imagine better. And by the way, who defines best imaginable service? Well, you define best imaginable service. It's not the best imaginable service that we can think of. It's the best imaginable service that you can imagine. So that's the thread that goes through the entire TDC Group. You can see here how we operationalize that, but I think really the one bullet point that I think makes the point more clearly is that we earn trust by keeping our promises to you. That's the long and the short of it. So what are our strategic priorities for this year and then a couple of years hence down the road? Continue to work on the cultures of organizations, as you all know, are incredibly important. There are many different ways to define culture, and it's an interesting conversation to have that conversation about what that actually means. But there are two things that are really fundamental to us. One is extreme ownership, which is also a term of art. But extreme ownership basically means that every member of every employee of TDC is responsible for any member need that they intersect with. So it may be outside of their job, it may be after 5 o'clock, it may be lots of different things, it may be someone else was supposed to do it but it didn't get done, it may be a voicemail that wasn't delivered. It means that you're responsible for meeting the needs of our members. It's extreme ownership, and that you need to take ownership and you need to do what needs to be done, not just try, you actually need to get it done. So that's the notion of extreme ownership. But equally important is we need to be a culture that supports and is not afraid of innovation. Certainly any company, and again, I think all of you represent this, any company that just says, hey, we're doing great, let's just go steady as we go for the next 5 or 10 years and we'll be fine. You won't be here in 5 or 10 years because the world is moving much too fast, for just saying, we're good, we don't need to do anything else, we can stop thinking. So culture of innovation, very important. And again, it's not just to talk it, it's to create an environment where we encourage innovation and where we provide processes for innovation. Because having a good idea is a good idea, but it's just a good idea. You have to execute it. So there's no, I was going to say, are there any Nobel Prize for thinking? Well, I mean, a lot of Nobel Prizes are for thinking, but almost every Nobel Prize is related to things which some inspired individual thought about, but made fundamental contributions to the world that we live in. So it wasn't just the thought, it was that the thought could be actualized and had a demonstrable effect on the world. Continue scalable growth, no secret, consolidation is going to continue. It's really an economic principle, and once things start to consolidate, they don't stop until there's only 3 companies left in the world. I mean, basically, I can imagine 30 years from now, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and the doctor's company, right? But how do we grow? How do we grow? Well, organic growth is one of the ways we grow. It's organic growth, which is just our members attract other members. And that's one of the ways that we're most proud of, and we're unusually good at it. But we're good at it because our members like to talk about to their colleagues the service that they're receiving from the doctor's company. How did I ever get to be at the doctor's company? Well, back in the early Pleistocene era when I first went into practice, I joined the medical society. The medical society at that time was endorsed by CNA, so I got my medical professional liability insurance from CNA. Sitting in the doctor's lounge the following year, with a brilliant neurosurgeon, one of the finest people I've ever met, actually, interesting guy. And we're just chatting, and he said, well, who does your medical malpractice insurance? And I said, well, CNA, the medical society. He said, what are you, an idiot? Why aren't you with the doctor's company? So we're proud of organic growth. Merger and acquisition, very important. I'll show you the slide in a second about that. But also innovation startups. We're also very proud of TDC's startups. TDCSU is a TDC startup. It was started from scratch about 7 years ago, I think was the first beginning of it. And it now has more than $300 million and growing of premium in TDCSU, but it's a TDC startup. The APC initiative is a TDC startup. We insure more than 30,000 APCs, but and we have for a long time. But the vast majority of those APCs, in fact, that was our policy, had to be insured by our members, so they weren't working independently. That hasn't changed. Most of the APCs we have are still, of course, insured by our members. However, we're now opening the doors for APCs to work independently. And it's an important initiative. Why is it an important initiative? Because that's where healthcare is going. It's not for the doctor's company to direct where healthcare is going. It's to us, it falls to us to make sure that we're providing the best imaginable services to healthcare in whatever form of healthcare organization that healthcare institutions choose to use. This just gives you some notion of scale. You can see Doctors Company is the second largest professional liability insurer in the United States. Berkshire Hathaway is considerably larger, although the company that we compete directly with, which is part of Berkshire Hathaway, is MedPro, and we're actually larger than MedPro. But Berkshire Hathaway has several components that also write professional liability insurance, so they are by far the largest. On the other hand, if you are with Berkshire Hathaway, which is a very good company, no question about it, but if you're with Berkshire Hathaway and the company's doing well, it writes a check to Warren Buffett. If you're with the doctor's company and we're doing well, the dividend checks go to you. So there's a really fundamental difference. This is just a sketch of the merger and acquisition process that has really been fundamental to our growth to date. Last year, we acquired a New Jersey professional liability company called NJ Pure, and we continue always to be looking for more merger and acquisition, partly because it fuels growth, but also it brings us new energy, new employees, new visions, different ways of doing things, and we're true believers in diversity and true believers in hybrid vigor. And so we really find that that process really helps the organization grow and mature. Innovation, we talked about this, but here's two quotes that I thought were kind of interesting. One is from contingencies, and I put the quote in here because it is from contingencies, which is actually the magazine published by the American Academy of Actuaries. And I wanted you to know that I read the American Academy of Actuary publications, so I put the quote in. There are moments in time when things previously thought impossible are doable. This is one of those times, right? We're undergoing the wave of technology and the wave of cultural imperatives and the economic forces that are driving medicine create really a surge. And there are things that now can be done inside of healthcare, inside of even the world of insurance, that couldn't have been really done in the past. So it's exciting. And it's also, as pointed out here, this is from Price Waterhouse last year, pointing out that the new technology, and not the rest of the whole session, of course, is devoted to some of this new technology, generally referred briefly to as AI, makes it possible to do some things that would have been incredibly difficult before, and now do them easily. In fact, even do them without having to code them, because you can just ask the machine to code it for you. Pretty extraordinary. And so it really facilitates innovation. And operational excellence. I mean, again, we're stewards of our members' money. We have no independent profit motive. Any revenues that are not necessary for operations go back to our members. So how do we define operational excellence? Well, best imaginable service, that's key, but it also requires sustainable financial performance. Insurance is one of those strange products, or professional liability insurance in particular, is a very strange product in a sense. We set prices about a year before they reach our members, because they have to go through the literally 50-state Byzantine approval process. Hard to believe, but literally true. So there's that year lag. Then you write your premium check. No joy in ever writing a premium check, we get that. And then hopefully you have no claims. But if you do have a claim, it's probably on the average, it will not be adjudicated and resolved for 3.5 years. So it might be 5 years from the time we set the rate to the time your claim is finally resolved. 82% of the time it'll be resolved by TDC on your behalf with no indemnity paid at all, 82% of the time. And by the way, although a lot of insurance companies use similar figures, it's important to understand how they or we define a claim. It's not an incident report, it's not an adverse event, it's not an angry patient. We define a claim as a demand for payment. So when we closed 82% of our claims with no indemnity, these are actually real claims. So sustainable financial performance is key. We need to be there for you in the future that's relevant to the life cycle of your professional career and the litigation cycle. And it follows from that is expense control. But expense control is naturally right, there's not anyone in the room, especially in healthcare, who's not worried about expense control. But for TDC, it follows from both the notion of operational excellence and from stewardship. Look at some milestones from last year. This is a slide which I always do find interesting. There are a number of ways that we look at what's happening in healthcare in terms of consolidation of practices and how many doctor-owned practices are there and all of those kinds of things. But there are a number of databases that people use and refer to. The advantage of our database is that we're the same company, we count the same way and have been doing it for 45 years. So there's a consistency, and it's actuarially corrected. So that there's a consistency in these numbers, and trends within these numbers, I think, are probably as good a good database as you can find today for what's actually going on in healthcare delivery. And you can see that the number of solo practices, or we'll call that one or two doctors, is actually really stabilized essentially since 2017. I don't think most of us really think of it that way, but it's actually we have slightly more now than we did in 2017. And if you look at groups 5 or less, it has been basically the same percentage of our membership since 2017. It had been going down rather dramatically, it's now stabilized. why do I think that is? Well, because I think that most people who were moving towards consolidation or who couldn't bear the thought of either buying an electronic record or dealing with an electronic healthcare record have moved into larger groups where those considerations were taken care of by the groups. The ones who remain, I think, have probably made a conscious choice to remain, and we anticipate will likely remain for the remainder of their careers, which, as I said, is perfectly fine by us. It's not our job to tell people how to practice. Our job is to deliver services. But you can see that the average age of these 1 to 5 doctor groups is a little older. It's about 55 years. If you go down to the bottom of the chart, where the groups of 100 or more, or 50 or more, the average age is considerably less, 49 and 48. So again, so we're pleased. And I look at this chart and I feel good about the chart. Because again, I have to be agnostic to the directionality of the chart. What I need to be sure of is that we are reflecting where healthcare is going. And as the smaller practices gradually recede from the healthcare landscape, we need to be providing outstanding services to larger practices. And this slide tells me that we're doing that. Here's a slide that looks at it slightly differently. This is by generation. So the silent generation is now going silent. So that you can see that that's declining as a percentage of our members. The baby boomer generation is also declining for similar reasons. Gen X, stable, but you can see millennials. So obviously our major growth is in millennials, which is as it should be, because that's where the major growth is in the country. Gen Z, I have no idea why we put this down there, where you can see that we're very popular with Gen Z, although I'm not entirely sure where these docs, I mean, who's this, Dougie Hauser? I thought it took a long time to get through medical school. But nonetheless, we're very big with Gen Z, and we're happy about that. So there's a lot of generational change on top of everything else. 47% of doctors practicing in the United States are 55 years or older. At TDC, the number's 43%, so roughly similar. And again, I talked about organic growth. We've been really very good at organic growth. 2023 was the 9th year, and 2024 will be the 10th year in a row of growing by more than 10,000 new members. So in other words, we end the year with 10,000 members who were not members of the doctor's company when the year started. It's really a remarkable amount of organic growth. And it's reflected in premium. TDC is becoming I tend to think of it as a very large, mid-sized company. We now have almost $1.5 billion, $1,500,000 almost, but actually in 2024 we probably will have that, of premium on an annual basis. So it's a substantial growth. But again, what's really important to our members is what we do with the premium. One of the things we do to the members is they provided, through their premium, contributions to the capital base of the doctor's company. The TDC program gives them a way of accessing those contributions. If you're a mutual or you're a reciprocal, you elect the board of directors, which is great in both forms of organization. But if you're a reciprocal, you can also provide subscriber savings accounts. And the subscriber savings accounts are the secret sauce. So we have distributed $183 million in distributed written checks, $183 million for our member subscriber savings accounts, the Tribute program. But there's more than $1 billion that's been allocated for members. And again, the check is earned. Every member automatically has a subscriber savings account. And the check can be accessed on 3 milestones. Retirement would be the happy one, as opposed to the other 2, which are death and disability. But still, these are substantial checks. The largest check so far to an individual is $264,000. So these are substantial checks. Premium distribution by member segment. So you can see that the vast majority of our premium comes from MDs, and that percentage of premium is still high. It's more than 90%. But what's happening appropriately is that the number of dentists is growing dramatically, and the number of APCs is growing dramatically. And again, we expect that over the next few years, it's not so much that the dark blue is shrinking so much as the other two colors are growing. We expect to insure more and more APCs. And our growth in dentists is actually really quite extraordinary. It's actually the fastest growing segment of the doctor's company. Now, membership ownership, I think, is made clear really by this slide. So this is the average premium for a physician in the doctor's company. This is for MDs. Average premium in the doctor's company. And you can see that going back to 2005, it was about $17,000 a year. So that, again, what's the average premium? All specialties average for $1.3 million policy, $3 million policy, nationwide average, actuarially balanced. So it went down and down and down and down. Why? Because frequency went down and down and down. Until 2018. In 2018, severity, coded as nuclear verdicts, but severity began to go up. And so we had to reverse that. We had to reverse the trend and begin to increase the cost of MPL coverage. Frequency has not really rebounded much, which is terrific, but severity continues an inexorable rise upwards, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So it's gone up about 20% actually, which is substantial over the last 4 or 5 years. On the other hand, it's gone up in a way that we're pleased with, in the sense that it's only gone up by 3 to 5% a year. It's not nothing, but it's 3 to 5% a year. In previous MPL insurance crises, premium would go up by 20% a year, 25% a year, in part because the long tail nature of the liabilities makes it hard to understand what your losses are until 3 to 5 years after the premium check has been written. And in part because our regulatory system is so broken that most states won't allow you, most state insurance commissioners won't allow you to increase revenues until you can show blood in the streets. And then you get rate increases. But those shock rate increases aren't good for the profession. They aren't good for anybody. Much, much better. We at the doctor's company said, look, it's pretty clear what's happening. We're going to need more premium. We don't want to raise it by 20% in a year. We want to raise it by a few percent a year and get to where we need to be, and that's what we've done. Still in all, so you can see the 21%, but if you look at the green arrow at the top, the premium, the average premium that we charge today, $10,038, is the same as the premium that we charged in 2012. And that's not corrected for inflation. If we corrected it for inflation, it would be a fraction of that number, right? So it's really pretty remarkable. Not too many things are cheaper or as cheap today as they were 12 years ago. But that is true of the doctor's company average premium. Again, best imaginable service, what do our members say? Because again, you define what best imaginable service is. One of the handy metrics that we use is Net Promoter Score. I think you're all mostly familiar with Net Promoter Score? Yeah. Our Net Promoter Score is 78, which is really pretty remarkable. A good Net Promoter Score is 40, very good Net Promoter Score is 50. And if you look, a little bit hard to see on the slides, but if you look in the slide in the top right-hand corner, you can see Net Promoter Scores from other industries to get a sense of what that looks like. By the way, the reason it's a little tricky is that most companies don't tell you what their Net Promoter Score is. They don't advertise it. So where do we get this data? We get this data from Satmetrics, which is actually the proprietary company that actually owns the notion of a Net Promoter Score. And every so often they'll publish an article of what the leading companies are in various fields. And Costco is now the has the highest published Net Promoter Score of 79. And probably most people would say that's understandable. Same thing, Apple, remarkable, Ritz-Carlton, no surprise. One of the things that's tricky about Net Promoter Score, though, is I would have thought that it would be very hard to change your Net Promoter Score, that it would take a long time. And it's true, it doesn't usually change overnight. No, it doesn't change overnight. But it's a little bit surprising that USAA, which is still really a model insurance company, and we've collaborated with them. We've had them speak here. They're a terrific insurance company, terrific organization, but they've had a lot of bad publicity recently. And so their Net Promoter Score is still great, but it's gone down. So again, it just shows that these are not immutable changes. The thing, though, that I'm proudest of is the Net Promoter Score in the upper right hand. You can see it's 78.2, and this slightly different moment in time, it's 79. But after you have a claim, and we ask you, would you recommend the doctor's company to friends, family, associates? It goes up to 92, which is really extraordinary. Nobody wants to have a claim. Nobody wants to go through the legal process. And although you certainly want to win your claim, it doesn't mean that you now look back on what a wonderful experience. It's a pretty hateful experience to go through our litigation system as a defendant. So after we resolve your claim, and again, we resolve 82% of claims with no indemnity, but we ask everyone whether there's indemnity or not, how they feel about the doctor's company. Our Net Promoter Score actually goes up. But what about claims? So we mentioned frequency. Frequency is the number of claims per 100 doctors per year. Number of claims per 100 doctors per year. So a frequency of 8.3 means if you have 100 doctors, a little bit more than eight essentially would have a claim every year. The other end of the scale, frequency of 4.5 means in 2023, a little more than 4 doctors per 100 would have a claim. So frequency has gone down. It's roughly half of what it was 13, 14 years ago. Actually, if you go back to 2000 and a little bit before, frequency used to be in the 20s, which means 5 people sitting at this table, one of you, not you personally, but statistically, one of you would have a claim every year. Every year, one of you would have a claim. And in 5 years, each of you would have, so that's what a frequency of 20 would look like. So it has gone down since then, and now is at really historically low figures. You can see in 2019, it was 6.6. It dropped further during the pandemic, no surprise there. Basically, the courts were more or less closed. Although the lawyers never really sleep, so you can see that there's still claims. But still, frequency fell during the pandemic. And one of the big questions was, how much is it going to rebound after the pandemic? And really, to our absolute amazement, it has gone back up. That's not the amazing part, but it hasn't gone back up very much, right? It's still at historically low numbers. So I wish I could explain that to you. I don't think I understand really why it hasn't gone back to a higher number, other than we win so often and medical malpractice litigation is so expensive that lawyers will always follow the money and they'll look for the easy money, most, understandably, I guess. And so this is not the easiest place in the world to make a living as a plaintiff's lawyer. And so some of the lawyers may have migrated to other fields during this time, other richer pastures during this time. But still, it remains a very open question about where this number is going to go. But it's good news. On the other hand, severity is really the opposite. There's no going down in severity. Severity just continues to go up. And you can see here, cost about $90,000 to close the average claim in the doctor's company, and now 2023, almost $150,000. And again, what does that mean? It means 100% of true claims, demand for payment, when they're closed, what did they cost to close? So it's $149,000, but remember that 82% of claims close with no indemnity. So where's that $149,000 coming from? It's coming from the expense, primarily expert witnesses and defense attorneys, and then just the overhead of the company. And by the way, these years are adjusted. So this is in 2013, it's claims that opened in 2013. When they finally closed, what did they close at? So this gives you kind of a real sense of where we're going. So you can see that severity is a major issue. Bob White has really become a national leader in explaining and talking about severity across the country, nuclear verdicts across the country. And it's a genuine problem. We cannot really live in a society where every time the doctor or we get our day in court, we're betting the company on the outcome. That's not a stable playing field. Here's one version of this, a small, quick version. Medical professional liability nuclear verdicts let's arbitrarily define a nuclear verdict as greater than $10 million. And again, you can see that they dropped during the pandemic, but you can see they have come back very, very quickly. In 2023, we saw more than ever. 2024, we're unfortunately likely to surpass that number. Again, I emphasize these are not doctors' company verdicts. This is spread across the whole nation, sure. In the last 2 weeks, the state of Georgia has delivered 2 medical malpractice verdicts that total $81 million. 2 verdicts in Georgia, $81 million in the last 2 weeks. That's a serious problem. By the way, when you think about it, $81 million probably is close to or exceeds the entire amount of premium that's collected in the state of Georgia on an annual basis, going to just two claims. And so, tort reforms are under attack all across the country. I think you know this. They're always under attack. They've never not been under attack. When we in California, I say we because the founders of the Doctors Company were instrumental in creating MICRA, getting MICRA passed. And TDC, born in tort reform, has always supported and believes in legal reforms. And $250,000 in non-economic damages became sort of a national standard for effective tort reform. It still would be a national standard for effective tort reform. Just a reminder that the 9/11 plaintiffs group, right, arguably the most sympathetic group of plaintiffs in history, the government created a fund to compensate the victim families that lost family members in the 9/11 attacks, right? So you have the deepest pocket in the history of the world, US government, one of the most sympathetic groups of plaintiffs, if you will, or victims, if you will, in the history of the world. And their non-economic damages were capped at $250,000. Why? Because it's just impossible to insure infinity. It's just impossible to translate losses like that into dollars. So $250,000 is still a good number. However, more recently, we've all gone through inflation. We're still going through it somewhat. Inflation. It is just no longer possible to argue. In fact, you can argue it, and there's some sense to it, but you're not going to win the argument that $250,000 in 1976 is the same as $250,000 in 2024. Not going to win that argument. So we, California Doctors Company, strongly supporting and facilitating the negotiations. We agreed to a modification of MICRA that would increase the non-economic damages cap to $750,000. That's a lot of increase. It's tripling of the cap. So why did we agree to do it? We agreed to do it because we were able to negotiate that it would be done over 10 years. 10 years. So it's only going up by $50,000 a year, each year for 10 years. That's an increase that we can afford, that it's an increase that our members can adjust to. And so we were pleased to get that. Moreover, we were so effective in the negotiations that the plaintiffs' attorneys who were pushing an initiative that would have been on the ballot actually this coming November, agreed that we would write the statute. In other words, and we wanted to write the statute because we wanted to make sure that all the MICRA law would not be mitigated by changes in this. So we were able to write the modification to the statute. And so we're actually, it's unfortunate that the cap had to be increased, but we're proud of being able to make the increase sustainable and, you know, arguably more equitable in 2024. We can insure and do insure in the most litigious environments. In fact, the American Tort Reform Association publishes effectively named a report each year, Judicial Hellholes. And the Doctors Company is active in 9 of the top 10, and in 3 states that are aspiring to top 10. So why do we do that? Well, we do that because, first of all, we want to serve healthcare wherever healthcare is, and if it's not your fault if you live in a judicial hellhole. And second, as long as we can effectively and equitably match your premium to your actual risk, then we can effectively provide you protection. So we're not afraid of tough environments. On the other hand, we work relentlessly to improve those environments, and that makes us very different than most other insurance companies. Most other insurance companies, insurance, like many, you think of insurance like many businesses, a cost-plus business, right? You have your expenses, you add something to it for profit. Well, if you think about it that way, if you're an insurance company in a judicial hellhole, you just raise your rates, and you're actually making more money because you're getting a fixed cost over your rates. But we don't think that way. We think we want to make the environment equitable. We want our members to be able to pay no more than they should have to pay for professional liability insurance. So we work tirelessly. Commercial insurance have never really been effective advocates for tort reform. The member-owned professional liability companies used to be, but basically have pretty much left the negotiating table. They're small enough now that they no longer have the resources to effectively lobby for change or to lobby for preserving or creating new tort reforms. So TDC still invests very, very heavily. We have a very sophisticated full-time government relations department that looks at more than 5,000 bills a year that affect the practice of medicine, and to make sure that we're understanding what's out there and advocating where we feel that we need to advocate. And we're effectively also working to either create new tort reforms or to prevent tort reforms from being mitigated. All right, so that was the fun part, that's the insurance part. So let's talk about healthcare. You're living it, so I don't think any of this will be new to you. The key points in healthcare delivery, this is from my point of view: consolidation continues apace, no surprise. Healthcare spending continues to rise, no surprise. And actually, 2025, healthcare premiums, health insurance premiums, are going to rise dramatically, actually. We as a company are experiencing that as we negotiate for our 2025 employee healthcare insurance rates. Really, it's going to be a bad year from that point of view. AI will accelerate the digitalization of healthcare delivery. Population demographics, they are having a meaningful impact on healthcare, right? There's no question. The baby boomers are using much more healthcare than any generation prior, partly because as people age, they use more healthcare. That's not really new. But baby boomers, number one, are living longer than previous generations. And number two, have access to things, operations, various things that were not available before, and they are in demand. Joint replacements have become commonplace. Multiple joint replacements have become commonplace. Cardiac surgery, even non-invasive cardiac surgery in the elderly, truly elderly, has become commonplace. And of course, the cost of medications has become faintly ridiculous. So there's no surprise so the demographics are having a meaningful impact. Burnout-driven healthcare staffing, major problem. I don't actually see it getting better. And as always, our legal system is going to lag way, way behind all of these changes. The legal system changes very, very slowly. Even when you get a remarkably insightful decision or a remarkably bad decision, it takes multiple levels of appeal, often to the Supreme Court, before it actually becomes useful nationwide precedent. So medical legal jurisprudence, unbelievably slow to evolve, which means that all of this change in healthcare will take place in a 20th century legal environment. And again, as we all remember, the 20th century wasn't a great place for professional liability litigation. Healthcare spending, $4.8 trillion in 2023. That's $300 billion more than in 2022. $300 billion incremental. So 4.8 trillion, it's hard to even make analogies to how much $1 trillion is, but just remember that $1 trillion is 1,000 billions, right? If we spent the same percentage of our GDP as other major economies, we would be saving about $1.5 trillion a year. $1.5 trillion a year. Now, if we had better healthcare outcomes than those other economies, we might say it's worth it, because what's more important than your health? And if we could provide better health for $4.8 trillion, okay, then that's a useful priority. But the truth is, we can no longer pretend that we have the best healthcare system in the world, in part because I would argue we don't even have a healthcare system, right? There's no really national, nobody's actually responsible for healthcare globally. There are a mix and match of government and private programs. Healthcare institutions aren't standardized in any useful way in terms of metrics and procedures. Even innovations that are found to be useful need to be negotiated at every single healthcare institution, and often with every single doctor individually. So it's not truly a system of healthcare. And again, so consequently, when you look at healthcare, nationwide healthcare or national healthcare metrics, and you can see there's nothing to be proud of here. We have the lowest life expectancy. We have the highest rate of affordable death. We have 3 times higher infant and maternal mortality than most other first world countries. Okay, but why is healthcare in the United States so expensive? Well, this is a question that years ago, not too many years ago, 5, 7 years ago, there would be a lot of discussion about it, right? And people would say, I would say, most people would say, well, guns, alcohol, drugs, obesity, other things, those are unique burdens on the American healthcare system. All of which is true, and they are certainly drivers of healthcare costs. But it turns out that we don't use, despite all that, we don't use more healthcare per capita than any other country, any other first world country. We just charge more for the per capita usage that actually gets done. So the reason healthcare in the United States costs more than in other first world countries is because we charge more for it. Okay, well that sounds bad, but then the question really is, well, why do we charge more for it? Well, that's the rub. The administrative burden of healthcare in the United States is $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion goes to administration of the system. And all of you deal with forms, reimbursement, complexity, craziness in our system, so it's not that you're surprising. But this little gem of data from JAMA really literally blew my mind, and it still blows my mind. And every time I look at it, I have to go back to the article to make sure I'm not misquoting it, because it's numbing. There are 317,000 healthcare plans in the United States, 317,000. So when I talk about a non-system, that would be one piece of evidence. There are 600,000 separate billing codes in the United States. But that was too easy. There are 94,000 separate prices that have been negotiated for those 600,000 billing codes. Meaning that there are 57 billion codes for different prices. We think airline pricing is ridiculous. They are a genius model, if only we could copy it. So, can AI help? Well, we'll begin to get some answers this afternoon. We're probably already getting some answers. But 2 cautionary things. First one comes from Deming, the management guru. Every system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes that it does. Complexity is built into the system, and there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why it's hard to change. Bill Gates also, I think, said this, a very important thing, I think, to remember as we go into a world of machines and codes. The first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. Fabulous. On the other hand, there's always another hand. The second law of automation is that automation applied to an inefficient process will magnify the inefficiency. So, yeah, I suppose it would help to unleash AI on these 57 billion codes, but it would be a lot better to reduce the number of codes and to make the system more efficient and then unleash AI. So that's one reason. Second is what The Economist, the magazine The Economist, calls big health. Intermediaries extract, in other words, non-providers of healthcare, extract an enormous percent of the entire American healthcare budget, about 45%. Only 4 health insurance companies control 50% of all the private insurance in the United States, 50% 4 companies. 4 pharmacies account for 60% of drug dispensing revenue. And 3 pharmacy benefit managers, they handle 80% of all prescription claims. So that's where 45% of healthcare revenue actually goes. It's to big health intermediaries. And again, that's distinct from the administrative cost of the system. Then the Affordable Care Act. I'm not criticizing the Affordable Care Act, but it did have some unintended consequences. One of the things that was written into the Affordable Care Act is that health insurers had to have no lower than an 85% medical loss ratio. In other words, the health insurers' revenues, 85% needed to go to pay healthcare claims. Only 15% could be reserved for underwriting, for expenses and profit. Maybe a good idea, maybe not a good idea, but the notion was to keep a cap on healthcare costs. But it had unintended consequences. Health insurers are gigantic. So, and we can go where the money is, but another way of saying you go where the money is, you go where the incentives are, and the incentives lead you to the money, right? So the unintended consequence of the Affordable Health Care Act is that large health insurance with huge pots of money migrated to ownership of other parts of the American healthcare system that weren't capped by theirs, right? So it makes a lot of sense for United Health to buy physician practices because the revenue for physician practices wasn't capped. Moreover, United Healthcare owning the practices could steer its members to these practices. So that was an unfortunate unintended consequence. Now, there have been some bright lights. There are some potential disruptors of the system. But unfortunately, at this point, they've had really a very limited impact. It's really a David and Goliath. Even someone, Mark Cuban, who I think is a remarkable guy in lots of different ways, his cost-plus drug company is really, really extraordinary. He contracts with the pharmaceutical companies that make them, and now he's actually building his own pharmaceutical factories. And whatever the cost is, he adds 15%, that's it. That's the price. That sounds like 15% should be a healthy profit margin. And I think most of us would be thrilled to have a 15% profit margin. That 15% profit margin leads to double-digit, if not triple-digit, if not quadruple-digit reductions in the cost of the drugs available through Mark Cuban's cost plus. Really an extraordinary thing. Amazon, I'll show you Amazon in a second, because Amazon also is a potential disruptor. But again, the cumulative impact of these kinds of disruptors is small. It's less than 2% impact on healthcare. Consolidation, we talked about consolidation. What's the promise of consolidation? Well, the promise is a very strong, bright promise. I mean, it's economies of scale, consistent outcomes, quality assurance, less outcome variability. There's a lot of promise in healthcare consolidation. What's the other side of healthcare consolidation? And when I say the other side, if the goal is to reduce the cost or increase the access, then raising prices is the opposite of doing that, is pricing power. And in fact, much consolidation is driven by the laws of economics, and one of the reasons you do it, yes, economies of scale, but also pricing power. And so we really have to look at what are the outcomes. And again, a very interesting article in JAMA from last year, worth looking at. And they looked at literally the thousands of the largest healthcare systems in the country, and before and after consolidation. And what they found was physician prices after consolidation rose by between 12 and 26%. Hospital prices rose on an average of 31%. Well, okay, so what happened to the quality? Well, the quality went up, but it was like 2%. Americans no longer reflexively say that we have the best healthcare system in the world. In fact, about half of America doesn't think it's very good, actually. This is a Gallup poll, so again, sort of non-political poll. Confidence in the medical system as a whole decreased from 51% in 2020 to 38% in 2022. And an update to that is it's going down further. Remarkably low confidence in the American healthcare system by Americans. Now, retail medicine. In past talks like this, and you're all living it, we've talked a lot about retail medicine. It's really a disruptor. It's a challenge for lots of reasons. Part of the reasons it's so challenging is first that these are large institutions with lots of capital. And second, they don't need to make much money in healthcare. They don't even really need to break even. What they need to do is drive shopping to their stores and not lose too much money on the healthcare system. Obviously, actual healthcare institutions don't have that luxury. And the other thing, by the way, is that retail medicine has no professional responsibility for outcomes, no professional responsibility to the healthcare system itself. Physicians, healthcare institutions certainly have and feel that responsibility. Retail medicine doesn't have that responsibility. I'm not saying it's evil, but it's a different system. Nonetheless, even with the advantages that they have, it's not going as well as expected. Walmart is closing all 51 of its healthcare centers, and surprising. They went at it for 4 or 5 years and gave up on it. We'll see where they go from here, but they gave up on it. United Healthcare is closing some of its virtual healthcare clinics, and Walgreens Village MD, which notably has a lot of publicity, is closing 6 clinics in Nevada. Well, 6 clinics in Nevada is not the end of the world from this point of view, but again, the real point is that companies are not meeting their financial goals, and when they don't meet their financial goals, they just move on. It's not critical to them. You can't move on when your books aren't balancing. And here's Amazon. So, what's the internet mantra? Fail fast and iterate. That's never going to work in healthcare, right? But still, we all remember, or many of you remember, 2018 Haven. The company that came to be known as Haven was the partnership, strategic alliance between Berkshire, JP Morgan Chase, and Amazon. A lot of promise to that. With all that capital, with all that business acumen, with all that distribution ability, with that just global reach, what could they do to make healthcare more efficient, less costly, and more accessible? Well, unfortunately, not much. And within 3 years, the Haven partnership was dissolved, doesn't exist anymore. In 2019, Amazon was already moving on and created Amazon Care, which was a virtual healthcare system marketed primarily through companies for their employees. That closed 3 years later, to be succeeded by Amazon Clinic, which was direct-to-consumer virtual care, and that is still going strong. And many of you are probably getting spam from Amazon saying, take a look at our virtual clinics. They purchased One Medical, so 836,000 members, but 221 offices, so they began to put some bricks and mortar into an Amazon system. And now Amazon Pharmacy. Amazon Pharmacy, again, a number of iterations, but if you're a member of Prime, you can buy RX Pass, and for $5 a month, you can get unlimited quantities of the top 60 most prescribed generic drugs in the United States for $5 a month, delivered by Amazon Prime. Pretty remarkable. Now, it's only for that relatively limited 60 out of thousands, but still, those are the most commonly prescribed drugs in the United States for $5 a month, delivered to your door. And by the way, they will also accept insurance if you have it. But again, is that going to be big enough to compete with the way Americans traditionally get their drugs through local pharmacies and so forth? Well, it might. It certainly might. It's an interesting thing. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, which roughly means the more things change, the more they stay the same. Since 2010, CMS, the CMS Center for Innovation, has canceled 48 of its 54 alternative payment systems. That's not a very good record, right? Because, I mean, many of these are pilot programs, but, you know, where's the successful one? The other 6, it's not as though they're home runs. They just haven't been canceled yet. So CMS has really been unsuccessful in moving the country away from fee-for-service, or even with fee-for-service. It's been unsuccessful in doing anything to refine the system as it exists today. And then just one example here, which is a little bit intermediate of an example, understandable. So we all know digital radiology is one of the areas where artificial intelligence had a big impact. AI can really interpret many X-rays quite well. Mammograms really especially well. And so many radiologists today are using AI to assist or to overread or to check their own reading of the mammograms. However, despite our, what was the number, 50 billion billing codes, there are no billing code for AI-assisted mammogram reading. So what happens? Radiologists just increase their reading fees for mammograms. Our system just isn't built to accommodate to these changes. Now, can we just produce more physicians and alleviate some of the shortage? Here's the answer: no, not even a chance of that happening. The number of physicians practicing in the United States will increase by less than 0.5% per year over the 15 years between 2018 and 2033, and I'll show you what that graph looks like. And the ones who are entering the system will graduate with 200,000 in medical debt on the average, some as many as 300,000 or more. And I'm sure by 2033 that number will have actually gone up. NPs, actually barely better, really shocking, really shocking. Nursing school is not much less expensive than medical school, and yet they graduate with $185,000 in debt on the average. So we're not going to be producing anywhere near enough primary care physicians, and this is what the graphs looks like. And you can see the minimal increase over this time frame for physicians, a dramatic increase in APCs. And this alone, I think, really explains to you why we're seeing so many more APCs into the system, and the pretty obvious fact that they are become more and more and more critical for primary care in the United States, and not just primary care, but especially primary care in the United States. Now, what about patient-centered care? We've been talking about patient-centered care for more than 25 years. First of all, if you were like me, I didn't even like the term for 10 years. What else were doctors if not patient-centered? What else would we be doing? Who else are we working with? We're working with our patients. But the truth is, if you take a step back and kind of assess what part of patient care is actually patient-centered, other than perhaps the doctor-patient relationship, but the provision of care. Is it convenient to get access? Can you get appointments regularly? Are services available anytime that you need them? Where else do you pay for parking for a very expensive procedure? It's not patient-centered. It's not even close. And the thing is, Americans in the world knows the difference now, right? We know what good service looks like, right? Amazon and many other companies sort of taught, Nordstrom's, others, many other companies sort of redefined what good service looks like. And Americans know that. And there's very little, if anything, about our healthcare system that really could be defined as great service, great people. I'm not saying that there's not great services provided, but I'm talking about the general notion of great service. So, and the fact is, we would have real trouble, and it'd be interesting to do if we had more time, I'd love to do it. How would we even define patient-centered care? In other words, we as providers, we as clinicians, how would we define patient-centered care? The truth is, we can't even really define it in a way that fits within our notion of the limitations of the healthcare system. Better, faster, cheaper is a mantra, and it's a punchline, right? Better, faster, cheaper, the punchline is choose any two. But now, you can get better, faster, cheaper in various parts of the healthcare system, and basically that's what retail medicine was looking to do, right? So it was going to take, and is taking, some of the low-hanging fruit from primary care, moving it into pharmacies and appended healthcare providing systems, primarily with APCs. and that they could afford to provide lower prices for routine medical services. On the other hand, again, they're having trouble making money even on that basis. Moreover, it robs the low-hanging fruit from already tenuous primary care. So again, and it's not their responsibility, but that is really the point. It is not their responsibility to worry about that. But we as healthcare providers do need to worry about that. Here's another thing about patient-centered care. This is a brand new study from, just published 2 weeks ago. These are the average wait times for appointments in major cities across the United States. And by the way, this isn't just, random. These are tens of thousands of secret shoppers making appointments, trying to make appointments across the span of care in the United States. And look at these wait times. Pretty amazing, actually, and the article comments about this. Boston has by far the highest concentration of physicians to population in the United States because of all the academic medical centers. Not working as far as the patients in Boston are concerned, at least in terms of timely access. And we've all had this experience. I think all of us have had this experience of loved ones who go to the emergency room, or ourselves, we go to the emergency room. Fortunately, it's not an immediate crisis. You're free to be it's okay to be discharged, but you need to make a follow-up appointment with your cardiologist, or you need to make a follow-up appointment with your gastroenterologist, or you need to make a follow-up appointment with your primary care doc. Okay, so what happens? It's going to take you forever to make that appointment. That's not going to be great care. We're turning an emergency into a nothingness. Digital health. Okay, well, it's no surprise we're all awash in digital data. Digital data is expanding exponentially, but the problem is the challenge of turning the data into actionable information is expanding every bit as fast as the size of the data itself. Real problem for digital health. Problem to be solved, but still a problem. But also digital health creates new MPL, professional liability exposure, and it also, of course, exposes to more cyber risk. And you know that cyber risk is a fundamental challenge now to the healthcare system for lots of reasons. Cyber criminals go to where the money is, and there's an incredible value in medical records because they are full. Every medical record is a complete all you can eat personal identity theft platform. It has all your personal information, all your financial information, as well as healthcare, which should be, of course, private, but it isn't once it's stolen. So new expanded professional liability exposure as well as cyber risk. Plus, by the way, the other part of it, for our great healthcare system, our cyber defenses as a system nationwide are primitive, right? That's one of the reasons why hackers can find it. They go where the money is, yes, but also it's poorly defended. Most physicians' offices are not using state-of-the-art cyber defenses. Even most healthcare systems aren't using state-of-the-art cyber defenses. And I will be free to admit that no one on earth seems to have state-of-the-art cyber defenses. But be that as it may, it's not difficult to steal healthcare information. Now, this one, again, this sort of shocked me when I saw it. Gen Z trusts TikTok and YouTube more than doctors. Really. But then I thought about it. Well, maybe their reasons aren't that bad. It's accessible, it's affordable, and it's approachable. I wouldn't want the average TikToker to do my colonoscopy, but be that as it may, the appeal of this kind of thing, right? Accessibility, affordability, approachability is irrefutable. And somehow we in America need to provide a healthcare system that can begin to meet those challenges. EHRs, are we there yet? Again, I think you know the answer better than I do. But this again, just another fact, well, it's a fact as opposed to a factoid, but it's a smaller fact, except that here we are more than a decade from 2010, Affordable Health Care Act billions of dollars allocated to computerized American healthcare. And that was successful in the sense that virtually every segment of American healthcare is now computerized, or has computerized, computerized. But it's a Tower of Babel, largely. Mostly doesn't talk to each other. And the records don't mostly talk to each other. They're not easily accessed unless you're inside the system, or unless you're with Epic. But Epic is part of the solution. It's also part of the problem, right? Epic records are well accessible to other Epic providers. Good. But until recently, they've been walled off from any other healthcare providers. Now that's beginning to change, but it took an awfully long time, and we're certainly not there yet. But riding to the rescue, CMS in December 2023 launched the brilliantly named Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, TEFCA, to address gaps in health information exchange. In other words, it's supposed to be a federal standard to facilitate healthcare information exchange. So this is 13 years after the Affordable Care Act. So right now we have 5 that are qualified in the country. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's it. So we are so far from really what can be gained from electronic healthcare records. It's really shocking. Now, I'm shamelessly stealing from our oracle, Bob Wachter. He talks about the productivity paradox in healthcare. And the productivity paradox is something that doesn't only apply to healthcare, but certainly does apply to healthcare, which basically means that it takes new innovations actually can set productivity back before they're fully adopted, fully integrated. And it takes a long time. So even if things are working well, it takes a long time before you actually see the productivity gains. So when we see that, other people call it a J-curve, we see that in all aspects of industry. But it's exceptionally easy to use. It doesn't require complex hardware. You can use it, heck, you can begin to use it you can use it a little bit on your phone. You can certainly use it on your laptop. Multiple companies are competing to solve. There's no mega AI company yet. I mean, there are, at least in healthcare, but that'll come within nanoseconds. But nonetheless, there are lots of competing companies, and competition is good. The APCs allow facilitation with existing electronic healthcare records, critical. And AI improves in rapid cycles. Any of you who every so often ask ChatGPT to give you a toast or do anything else that might be useful, they were terrible at the beginning. They're getting better and better. Trivial example, but the point is, it's really improving very, very rapidly. The very unfortunately named hallucinations are becoming less frequent. And by the way, it always perplexed me why they would use the name hallucination. Most AI people sort of reject the notion that AI is thinking. Well, then why is it hallucinating if it's not? What is that if it's not thinking? And if it's not thinking, but you can't tell, it's sort of Turing's law of computers. If a really good computer is so good that you don't know it's a computer, well, that's kind of what AI is. And so hallucinations, anyway, I digress. Problems created by prior digital innovations of recent medical technologies, such as the documentation burden and the EHR inbox, may be addressed. And I actually do believe that. I really do believe it. On the other hand, I'm still a little bit cautious about declaring victory that we now have one new technological innovation to clean up the mess made by the last technological innovation. And just a brief note on AI bias, because this is something we all hear about. It's a very important notion. But I found this article to be particularly helpful because it pins what the notion of AI bias might mean in healthcare. I mean, we tend to think of bias in terms of DEI, which is appropriate, reasonable, understandable, but that's part of what happens to healthcare. But it's not the only thing. AI is only as good or is only as relevant as the data set on which it's trained. So if, for example, the United Kingdom develops an AI for healthcare that worked really, in fact, this is a true example. It worked actually quite well when applied to England. When it was exported to Scandinavia, the same system, where it was terrible. Because the genetic base of the populations are different, the alcohol usage of the populations are different, the demographics are different. So the system doesn't work at all. But that is a form of bias, right? And the bias here was that assuming that everything that worked for an English population would work for other populations. Well, not that simple. And then there are taxonomy issues, which are sort of part of that. The notion of an acute abdomen it's not a universal notion, and it's defined a little bit differently in different parts of the world. But moreover, the causes are a little bit different the most likely causes are a little bit different in parts of the world. So there are taxonomy issues. A more obvious one, but one to think about, if your training data set in healthcare was predominantly based on a male population, then using that data set for AI to evaluate an acute abdomen in women would lead to very strange results and very poor results. So I mean, again, these are sort of obvious, but we don't necessarily think about them. Until I really read this, I didn't really capture the notion of AI bias. Prevalence of alcohol, very, very important differentiator among populations, very important differentiator when you're doing these kinds of things. And again, genetic risk is different based on populations. Now, we talked about the stasis in the courts. So the long and the short of it is, the courts are going to lag behind forever on this. It just takes way too long for precedents to have meaning. Every case will be adjudicated, and similar cases will be adjudicated across the United States in multiple courts at multiple levels. Eventually, we'll get to 9 different Supreme Court rulings, which will be overruled periodically. And so it's going to take a long time before we figure this out. But one of the points made in this article, which I do recommend to you, the opacity of AI algorithms may actually be a useful defense for, let's say, Google. If you can't define how the AI reached its conclusion, it's hard to say that it was faulty. It's hard to say that it was defective. So if you're a defendant in court and no one can actually understand what happened, they can understand what happened from the physician who used it or with the physician who used it. So the very opacity of AI may actually, unintended consequence, I think it's an unintended consequence, actually help shield the mega providers of AI in healthcare. We'll see how this plays out. By the way, this is a 7-page article, and when we talk about complexity in healthcare and what did we say, 60 billion billing codes? This 7-page article gives you a real notion of complexity in legal law, in medical legal law. Private equity in healthcare. Now, let me be clear. Private equity is a fundamental part of the American economy. It's a driver of innovation. It's one of the reasons why America has had the world's best economy since World War II, at least. So this isn't really a criticism of AI, but there is a question here. The underlying model of AI is to buy an asset, make it more profitable, and then sell it. And the question, and AI is making, private equity is having a major impact on healthcare. PE owns about 1/5 of proprietary for-profit hospitals, and a little bit more than that, about 1/4 of those serving rural populations. Private equity, again, as consolidation as an economic principle mandates, looks to control revenue streams. And if we look at private equity in healthcare in the United States, we find that a single private equity firm controlled a majority of one or more specialties in more than 50 major American markets, right? So it's also been established in at least a number of significant studies that post-private equity, the number of visits increases and the charge per visit also increases. And one measure of outcomes, not the only measure, but one measure of outcomes, hospital-acquired infections also increases, presumably as a result of decreased staffing, but it's hard to say. So the real issue here is the private equity model applied to healthcare? Is it going to work as well for healthcare as it has worked in other parts of the country? And in the interest of time, I won't go through these, but these just provide some of the background and some of the data that are used to make those summary points. Now, burnout. I love this study because we in healthcare now really dramatically affected by burnout, dramatically affected by short staffing, now well after the pandemic has passed. But to my mind, we're doing very, very little to make it any better. And the reason is we work around the problem. All these sorts of feel-good things, is meeting with a psychiatrist or a social worker in your healthcare group once a month, is that going to alleviate burnout? Might be helpful, but it's not changing anything fundamental about the root causes of burnout. So I think that's roughly obvious, but this study is not about healthcare exclusively, but to me it was an interesting study. This is an English study involving 46,000 workers who, at their various places of employment, were offered a total of 90 different interventions under the broad category of wellness. So if we think of wellness as a surrogate for burnout, I'm making, this is by extension, but it's an interesting study. 90 different interventions. And then they compared the satisfaction burnout scores of the people who were in the studies to a matched group of roughly 46,000 people who weren't in any of these studies. The participants in the studies reported no improvement compared to the non-participants, none, with one exception. Companies that offered opportunities or subsidized volunteer work chosen by their employees, those programs were successful. That is to say, they were appreciated by the employees and they had a positive effect. That's 1 out of 90 programs, and none of them involve pizza. So again, until we actually address what's causing burnout in healthcare, there's absolutely no reason to expect that it's going to get better. The economic forces driving healthcare change, they're well beyond the tipping point, right? None of this stuff goes away. We just don't go back to status quo ante. That's not happening in healthcare. It's not happening in the economy. It's not happening in the world. And almost never does, by the way. Consolidation is a fact of life, and it's evident in virtually every aspect of healthcare delivery. Primary care in the United States is definitely changing, but it's, again, there's no unifying principle to how it's changing. There's no one in charge of the change. It's a million different pilot programs, none of which are necessarily codified, comparable, or even transferable. So the change is welcome because there needs to be some change, because primary care in the United States, good primary care in the United States is accessible only to a handful of people, and that's really regardless of economic status, right? Really hard to find a primary care physician in the United States who provides comprehensive primary care services. They exist, but they're awfully hard to find. So primary care is changing, but it's still not clear what the outcome is going to look like. Digital medicine absolutely is coming of age. It's already here to some degree, but it's not magic. And the reason I say it's not magic is Arthur Clarke's famously quoted that he's a science fiction writer, if you're not familiar with him, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, digital medicine is coming of age, but it's not magic. So hopefully it'll get to be where it's magic, and maybe AI is closer to magic than we've had before. So as we look ahead for us, TDC, we need to continually, thoughtfully refine our vision in the face of a rapidly changing healthcare environment and an extremely uncertain world. It feels to me like we are more unstable and more uncertain than perhaps we've ever been, except really in times of war. And even the wars that we've had in my lifetime didn't involve the whole population. So TDC is committed to healthcare, we're mission-based, and we're fully engaged. We're grateful for the opportunity to partner with you and to advance, protect, and reward the practice of good medicine. And mostly, we want to thank you for all your contributions to making American healthcare what it can be and should be.